Most CSS-based layouts are float-based layouts. That is, the majority of the elements in the layout are floated to achieve element positioning. Although floated elements are removed from normal document flow, they still affect the elements that come after them, something that comes in very handy when building layouts. The float property has two specific values, left and right. A floated element shifts either to the left or to the right until its outer edge reaches the edge of its containing block or another floated element. Elements that come after a floated element act as if it's no longer there and will move up to occupy the now empty space. In some cases, this can lead to the floated element actually overlapping other items on the page. Line boxes, such as individual lines of text, will flow around a floated element, even though the containing block that the lines are inside of actually flows under the floated element. This is best illustrated by imagining text wrapping around an image. Floats will continue to affect any element that comes after them until the float is cleared. Now, we'll discuss clearing later. For right now, let's tackle some of the basics of floating. So here I have the floating.html file open, and this is found in the 10.03 folder. Let's take a quick look at the structure of our page. Inside of our page, we have three div tags. One has an ID of box 1, the other has an ID of box 2, and the last one has an ID of box number 3. As you can see, we already have some styles that are defining the width and the height of the boxes, and we also have some margins placed on the bottom of them to hold the boxes apart from each other. Well, let's go ahead and float our first element. So I'm going to go up to my CSS styles and highlight the selector #box1. That's our first div tag. Go ahead and add a property here, and you want to add the float property, and we're just going to float that to the left. And if you grab the pull down menu, you can see that you have left, right, none, or inherent. So really, those two values are what you're going to be choosing between left and right. I'm going to go ahead and choose left. And as soon as I do that, something really odd happens to our layout. Box 1 doesn't seem to move at all. In fact, it's just where it was before. Box 2, on the other hand, seems to have gone missing. Well, at least part of it's gone missing. And box 3 has moved up as well. So what happened here? Well, what happened was box number 1 was removed from normal document flow. Think of somebody just taking something off the page and picking it up so that it hovers over the page. Box 2 and 3, no longer seeing a box above them, moved up to occupy that space. So why are we still seeing the text for box number 2? Well, we're seeing the text because the containing element went up underneath the parent, but the text itself would wrap around the floated element. And that's what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about what happened to those inline boxes. Well, let's change it to float right and see if it looks any different. So go back to the same selector, choose box 1, float that to the right, and yeah, that looks a little different. Now, box 2 and box 3 are still moving up to occupy that space, but because they are no longer touching or interacting with box 1 at all, the inline boxes move up as well, and they're not trying to wrap around the element. Now, let's make another more drastic change. I'm going to take box number 1 and float it back to the left. Go ahead and highlight the selectors for box 2 and box 3, and for both of those, add a float left property as well. Now what's happening is it looks like we have a single line of elements, when in fact we know from the structure that we have 3 block level elements, one after another. What's happening is that remember that floated elements are going to go all the way over until they reach the edge of their containing element, or until they reach another floated element. So in this case, there is plenty of room for box 1, box 2, and box 3 to all fit on the same line. Now, this is very similar to some techniques that we do when building menus, for example. We'll take the menu items and float them to the left to form a horizontal menu bar. You could also think of these boxes as being larger, taller elements, and we're very close to having a 3-column layout. So you can see how flexible floats are when creating different types of layout elements on the page. Now, let's change this a little bit more to reflect a layout that you guys might be a little bit more used to seeing. I'm going to go up to box 1, and I'm going to take the float property and I'm going to get rid of it. The easiest way to do this is to simply click on the float itself, make sure that's highlighted in blue, and then click the trash can icon in the CSS Styles panel. Now, the reason that I cautioned you to make sure that this was highlighted in blue is that if you don't, you could delete the whole rule, and you don't want to do that. You want to make sure you're just deleting that property. Now what happens is box 2 and box 3 continue to float, but box 1 is left alone. Floats only affect the elements below them. So with box number 1 being part of normal document flow, and box 2 and box 3 floating, box 2 and box 3 are affected by the floats. Box 1 could care less. I'm going to take box 1 and change its width from 100 pixels to 600 pixels. Now I'm going to highlight box number 2. I'm going to leave its width at 100 pixels, but I'm also going to give it a margin to the right. So I'm going to add a property here, and I'm going to say margin dash right 25 pixels. Notice how that's pushing one floated element away from the other one. So instead of going all the way to the edge of the floated element, it hits the margin first, and it creates sort of a gutter between those two elements. I'm going to change its height to 600 pixels. Finally, I'm going to go to box number 3. And here, we're going to change its height to 600 pixels as well. And I'm going to change its width to 475 pixels. So now, this should seem fairly familiar to you. This is a very basic CSS-based layout. We have a single area up top that would typically be used as a header. Then we have a left column and a right column. The left column could be a sidebar or navigation. The right column would be the majority of your content. This is a very common layout technique, and although there are certainly variations on it, this is very widely used in websites all across the web. So in this movie, we've discussed the very basics of floating. However, this is by no means all you need to know in order to control floats. In any float-based layout, you'll find yourself quite often needing to restore the normal document flow, and that's where clearing comes in. In our next movie, we'll move a step closer to building simple page layouts by discussing clearing and how it is often used in the context of page layouts.